of the objects about him. So complete was his abstraction, however, that Ralph, usually as quick-sighted as any man, did not observe that he was followed by a shambling figure, which at one time stole behind him with noiseless footsteps, at another crept a few paces before him, and at another glided along by his side, at all times regarding him with an eye so keen and a look so eager and attentive that it was more like the expression of an intrusive face in some powerful picture or strongly marked dream than the scrutiny even of a most interested and anxious observer. The sky had been lowering and dark for some time, and the commencement of a violent storm of rain drove Ralph for shelter to a tree. He was leaning against it with folded arms, still buried in thought, when, happening to raise his eyes, he suddenly met those of a man who, creeping round the trunk, peered into his face with a searching look. There was something in the usurer's expression at the moment which the man appeared to remember well, for it decided him, and stepping close up to Ralph, he pronounced his name. Astonished for the moment, Ralph fell back a couple of paces and surveyed him from head to foot. A spare, dark, withered man, of about his own age, with a stooping body, and a very sinister face, rendered more ill-favoured by hollow and hungry cheeks, deeply sunburnt, and thick black eyebrows, blacker in contrast with the perfect whiteness of his hair, roughly clothed in shabby garments of a strange and uncouth make, and having about him an indefinable manner of depression and degradation. This, for a moment, was all he saw. But he looked again, and the face and person seemed gradually to grow less strange, to change as he looked, to subside and soften into lineaments that were familiar, until at last they resolved themselves, as if by some strange optical illusion, into those of one whom he had known for many years, and forgotten and lost sight of for nearly as many more. The man saw that the recognition was mutual, and beckoning to Ralph to take his former place under the tree, and not to stand in the falling rain, of which in his first surprise he had been quite regardless, addressed him in a hoarse, faint tone. "You would hardly have known me from my voice, I suppose, Mr. Nickleby?" he said. "No," returned Ralph, bending a severe look upon him, "though there is something in that I remember now." "There is little in me that you can call to mind as having been there 8 years ago, I dare say," observed the other. "Quite enough," said Ralph, carelessly, and averting his face. "More than enough." "If I had remained in doubt about you, Mr. Nickleby," said the other, "this reception and your manner would have decided me very soon." "Did you expect any other?" asked Ralph sharply. "No," said the man. "You were right," retorted Ralph, "and as you feel no surprise, need express none." "Mr. Nickleby," said the man bluntly, after a brief pause, during which he had seemed to struggle with an inclination to answer him by some reproach, "will you hear a few words that I have to say?" "I am obliged to wait here till the rain holds a little," said Ralph, looking abroad. "If you talk, sir, I shall not put my fingers in my ears, though your talking may have as much effect as if I did." "I was once in your confidence," thus his companion began. Ralph looked round and smiled involuntarily. "Well," said the other, "as much in your confidence as you ever chose to let anybody be." "Ah," rejoined Ralph, folding his arms, "that's another thing, quite another thing." "Don't let us play upon words, Mr. Nickleby, in the name of humanity." "Of what?" said Ralph. "Of humanity," replied the other sternly. "I am hungry and in want. If the change which you must see in me after so long an absence, must see, for I, upon whom it has come by slow and hard degrees, see it and know it well, will not move you to pity, let the knowledge that bread, not the daily bread of the Lord's Prayer, which, as it is offered up in cities like this, is understood to include half the luxuries of the world for the rich, and just as much coarse food as will support life for the poor, not that, of bread, a crust of dry hard bread is beyond my reach to-day. Let that have some weight with you, if nothing else has." "If this is the usual form in which you beg, sir," said Ralph, "you have studied your part well. But if you will take advice from one who knows something of the world and its ways, I should recommend a lower tone, a little lower tone, or you stand a fair chance of being starved in good earnest." As he said this, Ralph clenched his left wrist tightly with his right hand, and inclining his head a little on one side, and dropping his chin upon his breast, looked at him whom he addressed with a frowning, sullen face, the very picture of a man whom nothing could move or soften. "Yesterday was my first day in London," said the old man, glancing at his travel-stained dress and worn shoes. "It would have been better for you, I think, if it had been your last also," replied Ralph. "I have been seeking you these 2 days where I thought you were most likely to be found," resumed the other more humbly, "and I met you here at last, when I had almost given up the hope of encountering you, Mr. Nickleby." He seemed to wait for some reply, but, Ralph giving him none, he continued, "I am a most miserable and wretched outcast, nearly 60 years old, and as destitute and helpless as a child of 6. "I am 60 years old too," replied Ralph, "and am neither destitute nor helpless. Work. Don't make fine play-acting speeches about bread, but earn it." "How?" cried the other. "Where? Show me the means. Will you give them to me, will you?" "I did once," replied Ralph composedly. "You scarcely need ask me whether I will again." "It's 20 years ago or more," said the man in a suppressed voice, "since you and I fell out. You remember that? I claimed a share in the profits of some business I brought to you, and as I persisted you arrested me for an old advance of £10 odd shillings, including interest of 50% or so." "I remember something of it," replied Ralph carelessly. "What then?" "That didn't part us," said the man. "I made submission, being on the wrong side of the bolts and bars, and as you were not the made man then that you are now, you were glad enough to take back a clerk who wasn't over nice, and who knew something of the trade you drove." "You begged and prayed, and I consented," returned Ralph. "That was kind of me. Perhaps I did want you. I forget. I should think I did, or you would have begged in vain. You were useful, not too honest, not too delicate, not too nice of hand or heart, but useful." "Useful indeed," said the man. "Come, you have pinched and ground me down for some years before that, but I had served you faithfully up to that time, in spite of all your dog's usage. Had I?" Ralph made no reply. "Had I?" said the man again. "You had had your wages," rejoined Ralph, "and had done your work. We stood on equal ground so far, and could both cry quits." "Then, but not afterwards," said the other. "Not afterwards, certainly, not even then, for, as you've just said, you owed me money, and do still," replied Ralph. "That's not all," said the man eagerly. "That's not all. Mark that. I didn't forget that old sore, trust me. Partly in remembrance of that, and partly in the hope of making money some day by the scheme, I took advantage of my position about you, and possessed myself of a hold upon you which you would give half of all you have to know, and never can know but through me. I left you long after that time, remember. And as for some poor trickery that came within the law, but was nothing to what you money-makers daily practise just outside its bounds, was sent away a convict for 7 years. I have returned what you see me. Now, Mr. Nickleby," said the man with a strange mixture of humility and sense of power, "what help and assistance will you give me? What bribe, to speak out plainly? My expectations are not monstrous, but I must live, and to live I must eat and drink. Money is on your side, and hunger and thirst on mine. You may drive an easy bargain." "Is that all?" said Ralph, still eyeing his companion with the same steady look, and moving nothing but his lips. "It depends on you, Mr. Nickleby, whether that's all or not," was the rejoinder. "Why then, harkee, Mr. I don't know by what name I am to call you," said Ralph. "By my old one, if you like." "Why then, harkee, Mr. Brooker," said Ralph in his harshest accents, "and don't expect to draw another speech from me. Harkee, sir. I know you of old for a ready scoundrel, but you never had a stout heart, and hard work, with, maybe, chains upon those legs of yours, and shorter food than when I pinched and ground you, has blunted your wits, or you would not come with such a tale as this to me. You a hold upon me? Keep it, or publish it to the world, if you like." "I can't do that," interposed Brooker. "That wouldn't serve me." "Wouldn't it?" said Ralph. "It will serve you as much as bringing it to me, I promise you. To be plain with you, I am a careful